Let's talk about Roulette. In 2015, I uploaded my gambling thriller Roulette to YouTube. Originally released on the FX Home Cinema in 2010, I had written, directed, shot, edited and briefly cameoed in this ambitious 70-minute film aged just 17, taking almost a year to complete. And on YouTube it sat, practically dormant for months. And I was fine with that because I kind of dislike it. It was a massive achievement to finish it, especially considering I did most of it myself, but the story kinda sucks. The acting is bad, the dialogue lacks subtext, and the cinematography is wildly inconsistent. But then something strange happened. Over a year after being uploaded, Roulette suddenly began attracting audiences, and today has amassed over 140,000 views. Not all responses to it have been positive.
The worst acting I have ever seen, 2010 or 1955.
Don't give up your day job.
Even the serial was bad acting.
Plus the fighting, oh god, the fighting really looks bad.
God, that close up on that dude's face. If you are going to play in a film, at least cover the million zits you have on your face with makeup. I almost threw up a little. Gross.
That is extremely rude.
All valid criticism, but I think the problems with Roulette start much deeper in the internal workings of the story. It's been a decade since Roulette, so in this video I'm going to take a look at what I think are the 3 biggest problems with my script for Roulette and how adjusting them could have made for a better, more emotionally engaging film, even with the same limitations in cast, locations and budget I faced as a 17-year-old. But to understand Roulette, we have to go back to 2008. Whilst revising for my AS exams, I sketched out 10 storyboard panels for a short, tense Russian roulette sequence. I was just finishing my horror film 402 and was keen to practice creating cinematic tension in shorter form pieces. But I didn't have any time, so I shelved the project. Cut to 2009. Now I had 12 months more experience, 2 more short films under my belt, and a copy of Sid Field's screenplay. I became fascinated with story structure and wanted to write something that fit Field's famous 3-act paradigm. I dug out the old storyboards and worked backwards to establish who my main character was and why he was playing Russian roulette. With hindsight, this is not a good way to go about writing a story. The end result was Roulette, a 52-page script which, despite featuring characters and locations I thought I might have access to, was way longer than any script I wanted to make that summer. And then I made it anyway. The finished film is 70 minutes long, and say what you will about the content of the story, trust me, we'll get there. The actual structure of the story is spot on, at least according to Sid Field. If you take Field's original 3-act paradigm, which was designed to work for a 120-page script, and shrink it down to the 66 minutes of Roulette, all the key beats line up perfectly. So the story is great, right?
No, of course not.
Although stuff happens at roughly the right time, Roulette's script lacks emotional depth, dramatic stakes, and has convoluted plots that aren't fully explored. So here are the big 3 problems. Issue 1. Jake is a weak character. Strong characters tend to have internal flaws which they are forced to confront. We relate to characters that aren't perfect because we see ourselves in them, and root for them because they face adversity and come out on top, often changed for the better. Roulette is a story about a boy with a gift, so you might expect him to learn a valuable lesson about himself as he learns to master his gift. He might even have to use his gift to overcome an internal character flaw. The problem is, Jake doesn't really have any flaws, aside from a few minor flashes of arrogance in the 2nd act. This means he can't use his condition to overcome his shortcomings, so the story as a whole means a lot less. But what about stories where the hero doesn't change? Here, the enjoyment comes from watching our hero overcome odds that are stacked against them. But Jake doesn't face such opposition, apart from maybe in the fight scene where he physically faces off against Chris. And the stakes of Jake failing to master his condition are not made clear either, so that lessens the emotional impact of the story too. Jake isn't given any clear external goals either. There's no time machine to fix, villain to thwart, or bomb to stop. He just has the small-scale worries of the average 17-year-old. Girls, grades, and friends. The closest Jake has to a goal is his desire to date Sophie, which leads me on to issue 2, Jake and Sophie's non-existent relationship. Sophie is only in a few minutes of the film, which makes it difficult for the audience to build an emotional connection with her and invest in their relationship. She's first mentioned 4 minutes in, and it's made clear that Jake likes her.
Didn't ask Sophie out then.
No, I just missed maths. Anyways, I'm not going to do it yet.
She gets a couple of mentions in the first half, but is only seen for 15 seconds of screen time before Jake decides to ask her out.
I'm gonna go for it with Sophie.
What? Now?
We're halfway through the film, and suddenly Jake is dating a girl we as an audience barely know. What follows is a montage that doesn't really show them being coupley, and then, at 37 minutes in, at last, they finally get a scene together, an opportunity to present their relationship and any conflict, and I chose to do it as a phone conversation. What?
Well, let me give you a decision, Jake. It's me or the money. Speak to you soon.
By the time Sophie casts doubt on the relationship, she's had less than 2 minutes of screen time, and the relationship itself has only lasted 5 minutes of runtime, so we just don't care. Things improve a little in the second half. Sophie gets an opportunity to shine in the park scene, and at last we see the two of them together in person. This is the one scene where Sophie gets to challenge Jake and expose his weaknesses, but the damage has already been done, and by the time we next see Sophie, as a token hostage in the factory, she's been on screen for less than 3 minutes. The lack of Sophie's presence in the first half of Roulette hampers our ability to really empathise with Jake. Their interactions could have exposed Jake's flaws, if he had any, and could have given him something tangible that he stands to lose if he fails to understand his condition and change as a person. Instead, their relationship is relegated to a few seconds of a montage before being thrown into disarray, and, crucially, there are no scenes of Jake and Sophie working well together as a couple, so we aren't really sure if the relationship is worth saving. The sad truth is that Sophie exists entirely to give Jake a reason to participate in the Russian roulette game. Yep, I fell into the classic "heroine is only there so the hero can do the thing" trope, and that's just lazy. Issue 3. The Danny Forsyth Saga. When I wrote Roulette, I wanted it to include 3 interweaving plotlines. The murder mystery plotline was supposed to be the justification for the Russian roulette scene at the end. Jake finds out Harry committed the murder of Danny Forsyth years before, so Harry takes matters into his own hands, forcing Jake to play the game. There are 3 reasons this plot doesn't have much emotional weight. The first is, again, down to screen time. As with Jake and Sophie's relationship, the mystery is only referenced a few times throughout the story. Danny Forsyth himself isn't mentioned until 27 minutes in.
Apparently he killed a guy.
Killed someone?
Yeah, a guy called Danny Forsyth.
At 35 minutes, there is a fairly dull scene of Jake researching Harry, providing exposition on his character, and introducing some doubt over why Danny was killed. There's no mention of Danny again until Jake finds a convenient suitcase full of evidence and the murder weapon some 15 minutes later at Harry's house. By this point, the mystery of who killed Danny Forsyth has been given less than 2.5 minutes of focus, which hugely lessens the impact of the big reveal that Harry is the murderer. But it's not just about screen time. The murder of Danny Forsyth is a historical event and, crucially, is not an obstacle that Jake must overcome in order to achieve his goals. Had Jake needed to solve the mystery for some reason, it would have made us more invested in it, but Jake simply stumbles across the answer by accident. The implication is that Jake's bad luck phase causes him to find the suitcase, which in turn leads to the kidnap of him and Sophie and the Russian roulette game. But Jake's lack of agency here makes it feel very contrived.
Stumbled across my secret. Just unlucky.
And lastly, because the murder is a historical event, we have to be told about it rather than shown it. When I was writing Roulette, I considered putting in 1 or 2 flashback scenes in order to bring Danny and young Harry to life. But I eventually chose not to do this, partly because of the difficulty of casting these roles, but also because I felt it moved the plot too far away from Jake's own story of learning about his condition. In hindsight, the audience might have empathised a lot more had I shown this event, perhaps from different conflicting perspectives, rather than just telling the audience about it. There are plenty of other issues with Roulette. The condition itself is difficult to explain and not very marketable. Jake's 3 friends are very flat and basically all serve the same purpose. Certain characters' actions are just daft. Why does Jake split from his friend and run to a dark alley alone?
That's a really smart thing to do. When you are walking with a friend and you notice one guy following you, you split up, run to the darkest empty places and look for the nearest dead end. Quite brilliant.
Why does he leave the revolver with Harry?
But does he really have to leave the gun with a man who he thinks killed someone?
And let's not even start on the dialogue. But for me, it all comes back to Jake being an underdeveloped character, his relationship with Sophie not being fully explored, and the convoluted murder mystery plot that is mostly shoehorned in. Addressing these points would go a long way to creating a better story. Roulette was written in 1 month, and aside from some minor changes on the day, mostly follows the script rigidly. The lesson here is to take your time. Develop more rounded characters that actually have agency over the story, and introduce goals, stakes, and conflicts that your characters need to overcome. Don't get lazy and rely on a mixture of tropes and convoluted explanations to get your characters where you want them to be by the end of the story. Hopefully this look at my film will help you when you come to write yours. Until then, thanks for watching.